Hello and welcome. This is where I wave and let all of the streaming software catch up to what we're doing here at the New American Media. This is a special episode of the Agree to Disagree show. It's Tuesday, May 14, 2024. And we are going to be having a conversation with Ford Fischer. Ford is from News2Share. That's news, the number 2, share.com. And we have put that link down at the bottom of the screen. So make sure you're following him for all your independent journalism needs. Ford Fischer, welcome back to the program. How are you today, sir?
Thanks, doing well. And I'm sorry we have such a short amount of time, but I'm heading off to another demonstration basically right after this.
I mean, it is demonstration season, or so it seems. Ford, you have been covering demonstrations and encampments, well, man, for a lot of years now. So I guess real quick, before we kind of talk about what you were just out experiencing, kind of give our viewers and listeners kind of a behind the scenes taste of like what's really happening down on the ground at some of these colleges and universities. By the way, having a differentiation between college and university seems kind of archaic, but I feel like we
have a graduate school.
Yes, a graduate school.
Right. So overall, I've been covering demonstrations related to the sort of Israel-Palestine conflict for 10 years, like for as long as I've been doing this kind of work. And for the most part, that has taken the political style of essentially nonviolent rallies, like fairly mainstream in terms of their technique. So setting aside content, right, the typical way that a rally would happen, people usually get a permit, they show up, they talk about the thing, and they go, right? Occasionally, I've filmed that kind of thing devolve into sometimes some level of conflict with counter-protesters or whatever. But honestly, on this particular subject, I haven't seen the type of conflict that I've seen, for example, at racial justice protests or, counter protesters facing off with Trump supporters, having street fights and that kind of thing. This issue hasn't really fomented much beyond, I guess what you would say, like relatively mainstream First Amendment tactics. That has sort of changed in the last few months in response mostly to the encampment at Columbia University. So at Columbia University in New York, students basically started camping, literally setting up tents and saying, we're not leaving, and occupying an area of the campus. And particularly because of kind of the police crackdown on some of these, it's caused other universities' students to start doing the same thing kind of in solidarity with them. And so there's sort of a transformation of the tactics of the movement from just doing a rally and then leaving to we're staying at a place for as long as we can. So in the case of Columbia University, the way that the university responded was at first they cleared it out, but then the students came back and basically did it again. Then the campus sort of locked down the entire space so that people from the outside couldn't get in, right? So when I visited Columbia University one time during this whole encampment situation, I wasn't able to go into the university, right? I was only able to film the people who showed up on both sides of the issue outside of the university, but they were using student IDs to check who could go in and out. And by that, I mean campus security, not the protesters themselves.
Yeah, that's a little reminiscent of after January 6th, how they built the perimeter around, right there in D.C. to just kind of frame a space and add extra measures, really keeping people away from designated areas.
It's an interesting comparison. I think that the biggest contrast between those two things would be that the university is private property, whereas the Capitol is sort of kept private in a way, but it is literally, public. But the place where the comparison holds is that, it's well guarded, right? A big old fence around it, but then they are letting in certain people. So like while there was that fence around the Capitol, myself with a Capitol Hill press credential, I was able to still go inside. Similarly, at Columbia University, like, for example, my sister is a student there. Like, she was able to freely go in and out because she had a card that would scan. In any event, that played out a little bit different at some public universities. For example, I also visited And I didn't actually publish my footage because essentially not much happened in my little time visiting there. So I just sort of have it archivally. But I also visited University of Chicago. And in their case, they sort of had police standing by and watching it, but they didn't actually restrain who could go in and out. So there was no presumption that the people inside were necessarily students. So you did have other people who were more like professional activists or just activists who are not necessarily affiliated with the university. And in some cases, actually, at these situations, unhoused people have basically shown up and been like, well, if everyone's camping out and sharing food and everything, why, if you're homeless in the area, why not join up with some other folks who are all camping out and have, access to food and stuff like that. So some of these schools have made the decision to basically clear them out, right? Whereas others of them have sort of tried to balance, on the one hand, they view it as disruptive. On the other hand, if it's not violent and it's an expression of free speech, then you want to sort of lean toward that kind of giving some deference to the free speech implications of why you wouldn't want to clear out a thing just because they're camping out and saying stuff. But this kind of leads to what the story that I published with Matt Taibbi yesterday, which was here in Washington, D.C. What I found this situation to be kind of among the most fascinating, and that's what happened at George Washington University. So George Washington University is a private campus, and it is within Washington, D.C., which is not a state, right? So because D.C. is the capital of the United States under our sort of constitution, it doesn't count as a state. And the result of that in our modern political world is that although it has a mayor who sort of functions in a way like a governor, ultimately her authority is sort of superseded by the federal government. So whereas a mayor might also have state police that are, in their jurisdiction that answer to their governor, right? Like the mayor of DC is the top dog of Washington, DC, but the feds are above her. So what kind of happened was that there was a small encampment that started at GW, and originally they put sort of a circle around it. And I didn't get to witness this very beginning thing that happened, but this is sort of how it happened. They had a small, very small encampment. There was like 12 people or something like that. And basically, rather than clear it out, the police put a perimeter around it so people could leave, but they couldn't come back in. And the idea of this was that eventually it will dwindle to nothing, right? If
so, that's like that's the opposite of the carpenter bee trap that you hang up. The bee goes in, but it can't come out. The opposite of the carpenter.
It is the opposite of that. They can leave, but they can't come back in, and so you would naturally expect it to get smaller. However, there was some situation that happened late at night toward the end of April that basically led to a conflict between police and protesters. The exact nature of that conflict is a little bit disputed. But in essence, a crowd from outside took all of the barriers and threw them into a pile in the middle of the encampment, and they set up a much larger encampment. So now there was no longer a physical perimeter, and anybody, including myself, could just walk into the middle of the encampment on George Washington University's campus.
Wow, now, that's very symbolic of what's happening at our southern border. Just tossing the border barricades away, and it's a free-for-all. Whoever wants in, go for it. It's interesting how campuses are kind of like overlapping with what's happening nationally. Macro.
I'm not going there other than to say that if it was comparable, then the folks coming through the border would have to pick up the wall and put it in a pile somewhere in the middle of the country and then camp around the pile of wall.
Well, they're not exact comparisons, but there are some overlap.
And I can't imagine a more enraging situation for the MAGA folks who might be listening than a big old bonfire of wall. And
they go, your wall is right here in Alabama now.
Folks around.
I said it here.
And back to reality. So now there's all these people, and they're not verified as students. There's a combination of students from other universities, students from GW, and non-students who are now camped out. And I visited a couple times, and I would say there was maybe as many as 100 tents, although it's a little hard to say exactly. And the university actually asked the police to clear it, right? Like, all right, we've had enough of this. can you get rid of this for us? Right. Our campus cops are meant for sort of normal campus situations. We need the MPD to get rid of this thing. And what was sort of reported is that the mayor basically said no. And her logic, as stated kind of in public, is that they wanted to sort of not interrupt First Amendment activity for a period of time. And then we'll get to how that ended up, sort of ending. But I also think that the kind of thing that you could probably infer to some extent is that it's kind of ugly, sort of when police just push into a group of people who are just there and rip up their tents, and if any of them resist, then they end up getting like hit. Like the optics of it are something that really any mayor would probably want to avoid, unless the optics of leaving it are worse. So the thing that happened that was really
many have argued over the past 4 years, looking back at some of the last time encampments tore through cities, the destruction and the mayhem caused because of allowing that is way worse than the optics of cleaning it up and sorting it out. I think we have a different hindsight, a different lens to look through the rearview mirror on now, at least just a couple of years ago compared to today. I think maybe mood in the country has shifted a bit too.
I would guess that like the scenario that you're probably describing, for example, would be like the Chaz in Seattle. And
it's one of them, yes.
And so the sort of distinction I would draw is that although it has kind of varied at different universities and so forth, the Chaz had weapons, right? Like like people who were doing the Chaz thing actually shot people, right? Like people died in the Chaz.
We interviewed one of them.
A person was shot at Chaz.
Well, maybe it wasn't Chaz. It was out on the West Coast. Maybe it wasn't particularly Chaz. But I always found it interesting that when they set up encampments, the first thing was they put security and they determined who came in and went out. It's like, wow, Border Patrol. Instantly.
Yeah, well, and so that phenomena has been documented and criticized at some of these other universities where some of the students have sort of set up kind of ipso facto like border security, right? GW didn't.
One of the first things they do is make sure they know who's coming and going.
GW didn't have that. You could essentially walk through the encampment, and police did, right? Like even cops could just walk through the encampment, and people might yell at them, but whatever. The thing that was unique, though, is that one such group of people who did that was the Republican members of the House Oversight Committee. So exercising their federal authority kind of in this situation, sort of displeasured by the mayor not having cleared it, the House Oversight Committee, James Comer, Lauren Boebert, and a few of these others, basically took a tour of the encampment, and students yelled at them but did not assault them or try to prevent them from being there. The next day, Rick Scott, the senator from Florida, also showed up. And so you had all of these members of Congress basically saying, Mayor Bowser, you've got to clear this thing, whereas she had originally said that she wouldn't. So that visitation was 2 Thursdays ago now.
And that's essentially because the real, I'm using air quotes for people listening on the podcast. That's because the real governor of Washington, D.C. is what, 435 congressional members, or what's the number? Something like that. Like they all have a say in it.
So in theory, if they wanted to, like, Congress could like pass a law and Biden could sign it, or even Biden could just do something by executive order that would essentially force the hand of the mayor in a way that you couldn't do to any other jurisdiction. Like that would be kind of the point of leverage, is ultimately you could literally pass a law that says the mayor shall clear an encampment or something like that, right? Like if you manage to get Congress to do that. But in any event, they did say they were going to basically drag her in front of a committee hearing, which was going to now be last Wednesday. So the mayor was supposed to be testifying in front of Congress along with the police chief about essentially having a hearing about why they haven't cleared it yet. And these members of Congress would have essentially just publicly scolded her. I think it, by all accounts, is what would have occurred. And so here was what happened that was kind of fascinating. On Wednesday morning, so literally hours before she was set to testify, at like 3 a.m, the police came in, issued warnings, and then did sort of a raid. So people did have the opportunity to leave if they wanted to. But a number of them tried to stay, and a crowd gathered outside, which was forced away. Some people were maced, more than 30 people were arrested, and the police and DPW workers basically threw all of their tents and stuff in the trash. Anecdotally, I've heard a number of students claim that laptops, backpacks, there were some things like sort of left behind, or even just like not even intentionally in some cases, right? A student is staying in their dorm, but they have stuff in their tent or in someone else's tent or whatever. The stuff was left behind and essentially just thrown in the trash. I have seen at other universities, they've put out these tables of unclaimed stuff, and they like tell the students like, come get your stuff. And I would just say like, it's a trap, right? Like, hi, like, oh, I was there. This is mine. Identify me. Like, this is a pretty clear intel thing. But anyway, moving forward, the mayor held a press conference at 8:30 in the morning after that. And bear in mind, her testimony was supposed to be at 1 p.m. And basically, she described her story, which take it as you will. Her and the mayor's story is that as of Monday, they saw indicators of problems that hadn't been there before. And so they operationally made the decision, we should plan to clear this thing. And it just so happened that that plan was ready and executed hours before the testimony. But it was a coincidence. That's the sort of the position of the DC government. And so the things that they claimed were that there was two people found inside of a building who didn't have authorized access to it, that they had information about students from other cities who were coming, and that they saw presence of, they didn't describe what exactly they were, but they said defensive and offensive weapons of some kind. What was the other? There was one other factoid that they were, and the presence of counter-protester infiltrators. They actually cited essentially the presence of Zionists among the anti-Zionists as something that could possibly foment conflict and would necessitate shutting it down. So the mayor was asked at that hearing, do you still intend to testify? And she said, Mayor Comer spoke to me earlier, and we agreed that our time would be better spent focusing on the operation at hand, basically. So in essence, she was off the hook from her testimony.
So Representative Comer told her, do this. Representative Comer said, do this and we'll let it go. Like we'll drop this, but we need you to just jump to it already.
So, well, that exact thought is not exactly confirmed. It's more what's claimed is that essentially she did it, and he said, since you did it, we'll let it go. There hasn't been a specific indication that he said you'll be off the hook if you clear it, but clearly that's how it ended up going for whatever reason.
She definitely indicated a quid pro quo there, that she was given an ultimatum, and hey, I did my part, so I assume he's going to do his. That's at least how I read it.
It seemed like she took it that way. It's unclear what conversations led to it. Like, was there?
Oh yeah, we don't know, but she definitely sent the signals out that if I agree to do this, we're going to stop the other thing.
She did certainly send out the signal that I did this, and so I expect to not have to testify.
Yes,
and that was fulfilled one way or another. The one thing that I would add, just as an additional sort of chapter of this, is that the following day, a bunch of students reassembled and expressed that they were really mad that, from their perspective, the mayor bowed down to Republican members of Congress to clear out their event. And I filmed them actually set up a new encampment. It was very funny how quickly they just like managed to do this. Fresh out of the box, clearly used that 1-day shipping. They marched over to the administration building. And by the way, so the whole area was fenced off that this encampment had been at. So they marched over to the admin building, which was still, accessible. And they did it again. They set up all these tents and held a rally. This time they only held it for a few hours before the police basically assembled this giant line of cops with batons and so forth. And quite frankly, they would have been annihilated if they tried to hold the police back. There was way more cops, heavily armed with batons and so forth, who were about to push in. And so they would have gotten pretty seriously hurt, I think, if they had tried to physically prevent the encampment from being pushed through. So in the end, they ended up retreating. Those tents are still somewhere. And so who knows if they'll try it again. But I guess the last little, like, the PS that I would put on it is that graduations are kind of happening now. It's the end of the semester, so a lot
kind
of
of winding down,
ending up in different places. Like, their amount of caring about this issue, I don't think has any reason to change. But it remains an open question: how does this movement change or sustain itself, or does it just completely revert back to the way it was before this encampment situation? Does it re-escalate? In my mind, all eyes on Chicago DNC, but we'll see.
Yeah, you said those tents have got to be somewhere. It's like, hey, if you left your tent last week, please be sure to come by and pick up your tent. It's totally not.
Please bring your ID and bail money. No,
and bail money. Yes. Okay. Well, I know you got to get running. My two quick questions to you are: number one, you said trying to keep students in student areas and trying to change the dynamics of who's actually participating on their campuses. Did you get a sense? Are there any number, like what percentage, if you had to guess, or any information you have, what percentage of the people participating are students versus outside people coming in, bussing in, showing solidarity, professional paid agitators? Because, like, from the outside, we hear all sorts of theories on this. Like, oh, it's 99% outside agitators. Like, well, no, it's probably not that, but it's probably more than zero.
I think that it's really hard to say because those qualities aren't sort of superficial ones that you can tell by looking at someone's face. You know what I mean? Right? Like, you can't like look at a person and just be like, you look like you come from a different school, or you look like you belong at this school, or whatever. I will say that I have seen like, being at these events, I have not seen an extremely significant portion of participants who are not approximately college age, right? Like, most, like, the strong plurality of people at these events. And to be clear, I'm talking about the encampments, not just pro-Palestine things in general, but like at the encampments, like I hesitate to put like an exact number on it, but certainly some number above 90% of them are under 30. Maybe I'll put it that way.
Okay, that's fair. And you mentioned graduation, and I guess that kind of just blurs into the second part. I didn't want to cut you off there. I just know you're pressed for time.
Right.
I guess my final point, and if I cut you off, please continue your thought. But with graduation, commencement happening, I mean, we read that USC stopped their commencement. I don't know if they reverse course or not, but do you, once we get past that phase, is there a sense that this there's an intention to continue this, especially through the 2024 election? Is that the aim to kind of steer policy for the next administration, or a re-upping of the current administration?
So something that's kind of interesting about this is that it doesn't fit super well into the Republican versus Democrat kind of question. The most of these pro-Palestine activists, both inside the encampments and separate from that, have had most of their anger is directed toward Biden because he is the president. He's the one actually doing the stuff that they are angry at. And that's not to say that they prefer Trump. And indeed, I think if Trump was the president right now, I would guess that their anger would be more focused at Trump. So I think in a way it's like indifferent to the candidate themselves, but I think that the anger is focused on Biden in a way that makes me, for example, think that the DNC is more likely to be strongly targeted with protests than, for example, the RNC. As much as they might not like the results of a Trump presidency, Trump's not the one doing the thing that they're mad about. Biden is. I also think that there's a feeling sometimes among activists that they want to push the people who they actually might be able to guide to some extent. Biden is ardently pro-Israel. He was one of the most well-funded by Israeli interests senators. He has sort of strongly sided with Netanyahu for the most part throughout this process. It seems like the red line has kind of been like approaching sort of right now, which is like a full-on invasion of Rafah.
But Biden did free up a bunch of money to Iran, and he withheld weapons to Israel. So he's sending mixed signals for sure over the past half year.
Just to be clear, the withholding of weapons is is what I was just talking about, is the line, right? The Rafa thing. So that's happening kind of like right now. But like thus far, it's been pretty unconditional support. His conditionalization of support has essentially just reached a line right now. The thing you're referring to about Iran was before October 7th happened.
Yes.
Which is what actually culminated most of this stuff. I realize that people can have honest disagreement about whether, like, what the consequences of that freeing up of monies did. But in the context of the conflict, post October 7th, Biden has mostly done what Israel wants, essentially until like kind of this week, actually. So the question is, right, do these protesters give Biden the impression that you might lose the election over this issue? Right. I think that it is sort of a base election. It's something where it's not like I don't know if this person exists, a person who isn't sure if they'll vote for Trump or if they'll vote for Biden, right? Like they both make some good points. I could swing either way, right?
Find
like
people on both sides, Ford. Find people on both sides.
I think is really rare. I think the much more abundant voter and who this kind of thing affects is someone who says, I'm not sure if I'll vote, or I'm not sure if I'll vote for Biden, or if I'll vote for a different third party out of some sense of conscience, right? Like there are a number
of vote. I'm not gonna sit it out, but you definitely lost my vote. I'll donate it to a third party instead.
Yeah, right. That kind of thinking. I've seen a lot of these pro-Palestine demonstrators hold signs that very specifically said no votes for Biden 2024. Don't vote for either of them. I have seen people say like we should all support Cornel West, or something like that at these events. Also, the Green Party. So these folks, I think that the kind of pressure that puts is that Biden could acquiesce in some sense to their demands, hoping to get back some of those voters. But I don't think I've seen much of an indication that that's happened. And honestly, Biden has said that it hasn't. Biden has been asked that very specific question: have these encampments, have these protests change your approach to foreign policy? And he's literally just said no. And it's funny because you almost would expect that a political candidate would want to say like, I care what my base like cares about, right? Like honestly, Trump, when he's at a rally and people are excited about a specific thing, he talks more about that thing. Like Trump kind of listens to like what his
reads the room. Read the room.
He reads the room, right? Biden, they asked him, are you like, do you care what these protesters are saying? And Biden's like, no. So we'll see if.
But you're right though about Cornel West. If that's 0.25 of 1%, if there's RFK Jr., if there's 3%, if there's Jill Stein, that's 0.5%. I mean,
yeah.
That adds up to 5% real fast, and that
could make a big difference. The thing I would just say is like RFK has been pretty full-throated in his Israel support as well, and so I don't think the voter or any significant voter bloc exists who departs from Biden over this issue and therefore votes for RFK. You'd be much more likely to have that kind of voter in an issue over vaccines or censorship or something like that. Anyway, so we'll see how the rest of this sort of movement develops. I'm going this evening to, I guess, my first non-encampment related Palestine protest in a little while. And so I am interested to see whether they're able to sort of bring the energy, right? Do people keep, showing up, or, would this be a significantly smaller turnout? So it'll be interesting to me to see either way. That's actually kind of head into DC.
Okay, so back into DC. You're going to be streaming live on News2Share, correct?
If it's big enough, yeah. I mean, it probably yes. If I get there and there's like 2 people, like, peace, please. If it's 2 folks, it might just be a tweet. But no, I mean, assuming that it's a sizable demonstration, there should be a live stream at about 4 p.m.
Okay, so I have News2Share. That's at news2share.com. On X, it's N2S reports. That's right. Plural with an S. N2S.
Although for me, it's at Ford Fischer is where I live stream on Twitter. It's the News2Share on Facebook and YouTube is where you see the live stream. On Twitter, it's the at Ford Fischer is where you see the live stream.
And that's FISCHER at Ford Fischer, FISCH.
That's right. It's the German spelling.
Yes. All right. So you're going to be there at 9. No, I'm just kidding. Whatever time you'll be there. See, 9 means no in German, people.
9 means no, so your joke is invalid. Did your joke make sense? 9.
That's it. I'm out of here. Okay. Well, Ford, thank you for spending a few minutes. I know maybe one of these days we'll do a little bit more of an unpacking. I feel like we always talk for hours when we have you because it's interesting stuff, and you're just trying to figure out what's going on, getting at ground level, hitting record, and seeing what's happening. I mean, that really is what the new American media needs to be, is more actual content instead of more curated, funneled, angled, redirected, scripted content. It's important to just see the raw footage of what's actually happening as opposed to the narrative that certain people want you to see. So definitely check out Ford at News2Share, news2share.com, and streaming at Ford Fischer, Fischer. Any final words on your way out the door today, Ford? Thanks for joining us for a few minutes today.
Just that I agree about the raw footage comment, and I would just say, like, a lot of these situations, like practically everything that I cover, the mainstream media does get them wrong. They evaluate them based on individual little clips that are kind of based on often the perspective of the shooter, someone who's trying to make it look more violent, or someone who's trying to make it, look more awesome, like whatever. And so I do think that you get the most by finding, journalists whose coverage is pretty raw, right? Like if something goes peacefully, I tell you that. If something's violent, I show it. And I don't pretend anything is other than what it is.
And that's what media is. That's what's desperately needed in the media landscape right now. We got plenty of other options of scripted propaganda, but it's important to go around and you get different voices, you get different content, and it just gives you such a behind the scenes look at what's really going on. So Ford, have a safe excursion today. Always safety number one, and everybody else, be sure to follow Ford out in the field at News2Share and on X at Ford Fischer. Thank you so much. Appreciate your time, sir. To be continued.
Thanks,
all right. There he goes, everybody. Ford Fischer. So that was a special standalone segment. We have a few other interviews planned coming up in the near future and in the foreseeable future. The Agree to Disagree show was always a place to get together and talk about current events. But one of the cornerstones of what we do has been setting up direct conversations with newsmakers, with thought leaders. And we intend to get back to some of that. We had a really good run for about 14 months in a nice rhythm, just kind of covering the news, 60 minutes to 180 minutes, 200 minutes, about 2.5 hours sometimes. But I think bringing some of our guests back onto the program. If you're not aware, the New American Media has been around for about 13 years, putting content out, going to events and having interviews and producing our own independent original content. It's all online. It's all on the YouTube channel, youtube.com/The New American Media or /@The New American Media. They've taken a couple of our videos down because we mentioned the V word, which is insanity because Google Meta is insane because Facebook, Meta, Instagram, Google, YouTube, these places are just some of the worst spots to gather legitimate information. They derank, they deboost, they slant their coverage, they lie to you based on what you're searching for. And they have literally hidden videos that you could type the exact words for, videos I've done, and I can't find them to share with you. So we have a couple other places to check us out. The newamericanmedia.com is the homepage where you can find our content. If everything else goes away, that'll be the place that we put the most content out. The YouTube page is backed up at Odyssey, ODYSEE.com. Search the New American Media and follow us there. Everything we post to YouTube is mirrored over to Odyssey. Also, Rumble. The live streams that we create are uploaded to Rumble after the fact. And we just put up one of those such videos that YouTube took down. So go to Rumble and subscribe. We need 40 something more subscriptions on our Rumble channel. We're growing much better. We have 6,000 people subscribed to our channel on YouTube. We get triple the viewers on a channel that we have 53 subscribers on Rumble. So we are trying to get the hell away from YouTube. They don't want us. That much is obvious. They are not legitimate business partners. So we are on Rumble, and we encourage you to go to Rumble, search The New American Media, hit subscribe, try to watch some of these previous videos. Like I said, 14 months of bi-weekly, at least 2 shows a week for, over a year, maybe close to a year and a half of content. Good shows. If you let them play and let the ads play, it's like tossing a penny in our wishing well. Speaking of wishing well, if you like the New American Media, independent journalism, of course, like I said, go check out Ford Fischer at News2Share and Ford streaming at Ford, Fischer. But if you would like to support the New American Media and what we do here at TNAM and the Agree to Disagree show, we have a Patreon page, patreon.com/the New American Media. I think there's a couple different tiers. You could get us a cup of coffee a month. You could do the Netflix account where it's like $15 a month. I think you can do $100 a month. I think you can do $1,000 a month if you are definitely blessed to have more money than time, but you appreciate people fighting to call out liars and tell you what's really happening in the world. We appreciate each and every one of you supporting our independent media over there. On X, we are at American_media_ at American_media_. On Facebook, we have a page, The New American Media, and a private group, TNAM's The Agree to Disagree show. Good luck finding it. They hide that one like crazy. And on Instagram, The New American Media, we have a page. Truth Social, The New American Media, and our podcast is on Spotify, The Agree to Disagree show. So I think what I'm going to do now is I will wrap this special episode up. We're going to reboot. I'm going to get the stories together. I might not wait until 3 o'clock. I'm trying to determine if I want to mix up the time that we normally do shows or if we want to stick to our Tuesday, Thursday, 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time schedule. This is an evolving process. So if you have any thoughts or comments, let me know. Let me know. What do you think? Kenneth, how are you, sir? Looking through your comments here. Seeing we're a few minutes behind. Yes. Grumble, crumble, humble, noble. Yeah, Trump or rump. Yeah, just Ford talking about that theoretical voter that doesn't know who they're going to vote for. It's like, where is that person? If you don't know by now who you intend to vote for in a couple of months, I don't know what to tell you. It's all right in front of you. It's all pretty obvious. You're into what you're into. You got a candidate for that. But we did put up a poll on our X feed. And if you haven't voted on our poll on X, go to at American_media_ and answer this question. Agree or disagree? I'm already against whoever the Democrats replace Biden with. Agree or disagree? I'm already against whoever the Democrats replace Biden with. Because there's a lot of people, and I don't know anything I'm not telling you, and I'm not putting $100 on it per se. There's no universe where Biden could possibly be the candidate. I've thought that for a long time. When they announced he was going to be, I laughed. He's not campaigning. He's not putting 100,000 people, 60 to 100,000 people in New Jersey. Well, that's definitely not happening for Biden down in Alabama. I'll tell you what. There is no energy. There is no enthusiasm. In fact, the only energy and enthusiasm for Biden is on college campuses saying F Joe Biden. There was a video that showed pro-Israel counter protesters saying F Joe Biden, and then people on the Palestine Hamas side saying F Joe Biden. And it's like, wow, there were some good people on both sides here. Biden found a way to unite these two very different groups. Their eternal ages-long blood feud has been put on hold because they're finding solidarity in their dislike and displeasure of Joe Biden. The only animating energy for Biden is to oppose him. So anyway, I don't think it's going to happen, but I think Ford is astute to tell you that Chicago for the DNC, the Democrat convention this summer, could definitely be a powder keg, could be a wild ride full of protests. I would wager that's probably going to be a guarantee. But we will, of course, see how that plays out. And we'll see if the New American Media intends to go out there and cover either the DNC or the RNC. Kenneth saying Biden wins over the depends crowd. All right. So are you in favor of Hamas attacking Israel, or are you against it? Well, depends. Would you like to raise the purchasing power of the US dollar or continue to digitize trillions and thus devaluing the purchase price of the dollar? Well, it depends. Yeah, Joe Biden wins over the depends crowd. Although I think we're talking about adult undergarments there. Yeah, so on today's show, I think we're going to talk about Ashley Biden's diary in a court case and a sentencing. In a courtroom, it appears as though Ashley Biden has now confirmed what we have been talking about for a long time about just how creepy this Joe Biden character is, and everybody knows it. That's why the question of the day was, do you already oppose whoever the Democrats replace Biden with? It's like you knew what type of puppet you were putting up there in the first place. A heavily manipulatable, controlled, deep state asset that has us on the brink of a World War III in Russia because him and Obama overthrew Ukraine in 2014 with Victoria Nuland. Fantastic, Biden. Remember, there was a Biden, excuse me. Remember, there was a Barack Obama quote that said, never underestimate Joe Biden's ability to screw things up. I believe he said F things up, but I'm trying, Ringo. I'm trying real hard to limit the swearing. Yes, depends as in. All right. Well, let me press pause. Let me kind of revamp and get the stories intact. I may go right at 3. I may go in between now and 3, but I'm going to do the post-production and get that going, and we'll be back with our regular episode of the Agree to Disagree show, scrolling through the day's news and giving you updates on that coming up shortly. Look for the alerts. Hit subscribe. Hit the notification bell. And like I said, go back and check out some of the 1,400, close to 1,500 other videos that we have on the accounts. Lots of interesting interviews and conversations over the years. All right, to be continued. We will be back in a few, folks. Thank you much. And thanks to Ford Fischer. Go to News2Share. That's news, the number 2share.com, and streaming at Ford, Fischer.